Aloha, good morning. I think you fathers can understand that I could have sat there for many more hours and watched kids and grandkids and our relatives now from Australia. I had to remember, oh yeah, I'm supposed to get up now and have the privilege of giving the Word of God to us this morning. So Scott, thank you for that opportunity. And we do, as your missionaries, we do look forward to next Sunday where we will have the opportunity to report a lot of things to you that have happened because of our partnership with you through all of those 42 years. And I could launch into it. I'll stop. I won't. I'll save it for next week. But we have messages from believers in Austria and other parts of Europe and the Middle East that they want us to give to you. So we look forward to next week. As always, it is a delight to be back here at International. This was my spiritual birthplace. I was a senior in high school when a young couple who was attending International led me to faith in Christ back in their home in Foster Village, if those of you who know where that might be. So this was our church home, my first one initially, and it will always have that kind of a special place in my heart. We're going to take a look at Acts chapter 18 today, so turn to your digital Bibles, your paper ones, whatever you've got. It all works, and we just simply want to focus on the Word of God. Scott gave me the choice many, many months ago when we scheduled this trip. He said, you want to just do a message outside of our series, or do you want to be a part of our series? I said, I want to be a part of your series. I would love that opportunity to prepare something I haven't done before and to fit in with what he has been doing. So it's been a treat to watch him and to watch those messages over the last many weeks. The Apostle Paul goes to Sin City. Now that's an apt title for Acts chapter 18. It was commonly referred to as the city of sin. Its very name, Corinth, became a synonym for perversion. But to be historically accurate, most of that reputation was well earned 200 years before our time in Acts chapter 18. By the middle of the first century, it was no longer the city of 1,000 temple prostitutes that apparently it was previously. By the middle of that first century, the Romans seemed to be intent on making it the primary city in Greece, focused on commerce and administration rather than lustful pleasures. But once a city, or a person for that matter, has a reputation, it is very difficult to change people's minds, is it not? Once you have a reputation, whether you're a person or a place, that's what people think. So our reputation becomes extremely significant, and it impacts everything we want to do and say. We're going to take a quick look here at what was the political and the social environment that Paul was working in. Well, we've got some descriptors, some statements up there on the screen for you. They're a little bit repetitive, a little bit overlapping, because that's what the situation was. Paul and his companions were on a lengthy missionary journey. The good news they were proclaiming wasn't always perceived as such. The socioeconomic impact of people believing in and becoming followers of Jesus Christ was often profound. They could lose their jobs. They could lose their place in society. They could be kicked out of their families, and often were. They could be killed, and often were. All right? then what is the reason that people were willing to pay such a high price for trusting in Jesus Christ? What were they gaining that made any sacrifice worth the cost? Well, we're not going to discover all of the reasons, but we're going to get some insights as we push on through Acts chapter 18. But notice that the environment is getting increasingly belligerent and dangerous as we work our way through the book of Acts. Acts 18, verse 1. Then Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he became acquainted with a Jew named Aquila, or as my Italian friends would say, Aquila. He was born in Pontus, and he had recently arrived from Italy with his wife, Priscilla. They had left Italy when Claudius Caesar deported all Jews from Rome. Paul lived and worked with them, for they were tent makers, just as he was. Now, Paul may have had their scribe, their historical writer, Luke, with him, but he was without the rest of his longtime ministry team members. They were still back in northern Greece. So finding Aquila and Priscilla was a huge help and a huge encouragement. But why were they in Corinth? Why did this extremely unpopular ruler kick all the Jews out of Rome? That would have been a lot of people. Luke makes a point of mentioning Claudius Caesar, but who was this puppet of a politician? I've sometimes, in hearing Scott's messages, heard him declare himself to be a nerd. Well, he is. But I share his love of history. So I thought, okay, Luke, you recorded this. God, you recorded this. Who is this guy? What do we need to know about him? Anything? Well, in that next slide, you'll see that his full name was Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and that he was Roman emperor from 41 to 54 AD. Now, Claudius was a politician from day one. He was also the son of a popular Roman general, and he was the nephew of Tiberius. Should be a name familiar to us as Bible readers. Tiberius, but Claudius became emperor unexpectedly after Caligula was murdered. This happened a lot in Rome. It was the Roman guard that used force and intimidation to place Claudius on the throne in 41. Now, his significance to us as Bible readers is perhaps seen in his adoration of his uncle, Tiberius. He loved his uncle Tiberius. And his father and Tiberius were brothers. So he had been around the pinnacle of government all of his life. It was Tiberius who was the ruler of the Roman Empire during the years of Jesus' earthly ministry. Oh, and by the way, it was Tiberius who claimed to be God. And he did it in a rather public and unique way. As we can see, he put it right there on the currency. He stamped his image and his declaration on the coin. You can take a look at this one. You can see on the left side, you've got his portrait, his profile, and it says Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. So if you're son of the divine, if you're the son of God, you're God. You're divine yourself. Tiberius was claiming to be that, the son of God, because Augustus was God. And then you flip the coin over, and you've got him sitting on the throne, and the words Pontiff Maxim which means highest priest. So he was claiming to be divine, the Son of God, and he was claiming to be the highest priest that humanity had at its disposal. Isn't it ironic that in Matthew chapter 22, the enemies of Jesus posed the question, should we pay this tax to Caesar or not? And Jesus said, show me the coin. And they handed him this coin. And Jesus says, whose name and inscription is on it? Caesar's. He said, yeah. He wants it back. Give it to him. But where has God placed his image and his inscription? He wants it back too. Give it to him. To think that Jesus Christ, the true Son of God, the true highest priest, held this coin in his hand at one time where a human being was claiming to be exactly who Jesus was and is. Okay, that's my history, nerdy thing. Let's get back to Claudius. So we can see that he was an odd duck. He was sickly, clumsy, unattractive, but scholarly. He wrote several histories. He was ruthless towards individual senators and tended to disfavor the upper class, but catered to the military. His dad was a general, so he catered to the military. The invasion of Britain in 43 was part of his general expansion of frontiers. His expulsion of the Jews from Rome seems to be completely without provocation. They did nothing wrong. They did nothing that they could even, you could say, they're the source of the problem, let's get rid of them. It seems to be whimsical. It seems to have no political or economic reason whatsoever. Pure Semitic hatred. Which is still not around here. And I lived in a country that experienced that in the middle of the last century very, very painfully. So he expelled the Jews from Rome, and then he was assassinated by his fourth wife and succeeded by his son, Nero. See how all this history ties together? When you get some of the most infamous and some of the most distasteful people in history, they don't come from a vacuum. They come from someplace very specific. And Nero, perhaps the worst ruler of the Roman Empire of those 4 centuries, this is his daddy. And he's the one that kicked the Jews out. He's the reason that Aquila and Priscilla are in Corinth when Paul shows up and the two of them come together for ministry. The sovereign hand of God should always be looked for. It gives us great confidence when we see things happening that maybe we don't understand. But let's hurry back to our main man, Paul. Verse 4. Each Sabbath found Paul at the synagogue, trying to convince the Jews and Greeks alike. And after Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul spent all of his time preaching the word. He testified to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. But when they opposed and insulted him, Paul shook the dust from his clothes and he said, "Your blood is upon your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go preach to the Gentiles." This is one of those wow passages. Because we know what it cost his heart to even make that sentence, that statement. This is a major pivot point in the life of the Apostle Paul and in the expansion of the first century church. We can also see here that Paul is personally very agitated He's at the end of his rope, we would say. Your blood is upon your heads. Well, that's another way of saying you remain guilty. I, on the other hand, am innocent. He says, hey, I did the right thing. I gave you Jews first shot at this wonderful truth, but you rejected it. I'm done with you. From now on, I'm going to go talk to the Gentiles. That must have been one of the most soul-wrenching experiences Paul ever had, because we can read in Romans chapter 9 at another time a clear description of the Apostle Paul's love for his fellow Jewish countrymen, to the point where he said, I would be willing to be accursed apart from Christ if it would mean that my fellow Jews would come to faith in Christ. Wow. Paul was a Jew first and loved his heritage, which is why he always started at the synagogues in every city he went to with this good news. And actually, he's going to continue to do that. But he's made a major shift in his thinking. And he's going to prioritize the preaching to the non-Jews, which is a benefit to, I think, most of us. So, Paul's ticked off. Verse 7. Then he left and went to the home of Titus Justus, a Gentile, who worshiped God and lived right next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, and everyone in his household believed in the Lord. Many others in Corinth also heard Paul, became believers, and were baptized, like we're going to get to see this afternoon. That is always a thrill to see a person declare their faith in Christ and their intention to follow him through believers' baptism. But verses 7 and 8 sound like progress. It sounds like things are doing okay, but apparently not what Paul wanted. It wasn't enough. It wasn't what he wanted to see. How many Gentiles had come to faith in Christ now that he made that switch? Titus Justus. That's the only one that's named. So Paul said, I think I'm out of here. He came to the conclusion that enough was enough. He was done in Corinth. I'm quitting. I'm moving on. And he likely told Aquila and Priscilla, I am so out of here. How can you guys stay? You, International Church of Oahu, you have faithfully prayed for and supported Leanne and myself for over 40 years. But did you know that there were several days when I came to the very same conclusion regarding Austria? I said, I'm done. I don't need this. I could be so much more effective somewhere else, I think. I'm sure I could be. I am out of here. I've had it with the Austrians. I've had it with the lack of response. I've had it with this, and that too. I'm done. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. You're hearing my whining and my apparent lack of tenacity, and you're thinking, whew, good thing he's married to Leanne. Because he may be a wimp, but Leanne is no quitter. So she must be the reason they stayed all those years in Austria. It's a plausible conclusion. It's not true. Because she wanted to quit just as much as I did, just as often as I did. But by the sovereign grace of our God, we never both wanted to quit on the same day. And we talked each other out of it. We talked each other off the ledge, time after time after time. And we are so thankful to God that we did. We would have missed out on a lot of cool stuff if we had quit back in those early days each time we wanted to. So I get Paul. Yeah, some things have happened, but not enough. Paul wanted to see a harvest, and it was not happening. So he said, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. Goodbye, Sin City. But, like so often, God has other plans. Verse 9. One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision and told him, don't be afraid. Now, if God said don't be afraid, he must have been afraid. We tend to think of the Apostle Paul as, I don't know, what's your favorite superhero? We tend to think of him as faultless, no nerves, can accomplish anything, adequate for any task in any situation. Well, no, he was a human like you and me. And he could lose his temper, and he could do things poorly, and he could make a bad decision, and he could be afraid. And he could probably see the growing opposition in Corinth. So he said, you know what? I'm done here. So God says, Paul, don't be afraid. Speak out. Don't be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack or harm you. For many people in this city belong to me. So Paul stayed there for the next year and a half, teaching the Word of God. There is only one place recorded that Paul spent more time, and that was at Ephesus. Here he spends the next 18 months in the city that he probably isn't too enamored with, and he teaches the Word of God faithfully for 18 more months when he wanted to leave, and he was on his way out the door. Our awesome God knows when we need a special word of encouragement. And he knows that we are basically weak, we're frail, we're prone to discouragement. So he gives us some powerful doses of uplifting promises in his perfect word. He also uses our fellow brothers and sisters to speak courage back into our hearts so that we find plenty of reasons to get back up and to carry on. I love this declaration from God. I still have plenty of people in this city. They don't believe yet, but they're going to. And they're going to, Paul, if you hang in there. If you stay faithful, and the rest of your team and the rest of the people, teach people to share their faith in Christ with everybody they can, because I've still got a lot of people in this city that need to hear that message. Your pastor, Scott, grew up as a missionary kid in Austria. That's been said about 14 times already today. One day, though, we were in a season in Austria where a couple of our families who were team members of ours and had children who were friends of Scott's, they resigned. They did exactly what Paul wanted to do. They moved on. Now, in defense of them, they moved on to good ministries, but they were leaving Austria for their own reasons. And one night when it was becoming apparent that one more was going to be leaving, I remember hearing the story where Scott said to his mother, "Are so-and-so, are they leaving?" And Leanne said, "Well, what do you think?" And Scott says, "Yeah, they're leaving." And then Scott added, Why do we have to be the only ones who care about the lost in Austria? So he wasn't happy about it in the moment, but at least he understood why we were there. There were still more people that needed to hear this wonderful message of who Jesus Christ truly is. So Paul obeyed. You know, when you get a direct statement from God, that's a good thing to do. Obey it. And you and I may be thinking, well, I've never gotten one. Oh, yes, you have. You've got His Word, and so do I. And there's plenty of direct statements in there for us that we better obey about sharing our faith and about how to do ministry in life. So, that's not the end of the story for Corinth, because the opposition is growing stronger every day. Verse 12. But when Galio became governor of Achaia, some Jews rose up together against Paul and brought him before the governor for judgment. So it's like during these 18 months, the unbelieving Jews were getting angrier and more desperate to put a stop to Paul and his church planting team. And they thought they had the golden opportunity when a new sheriff rode into town named Galio. Galio became governor of the province, and he apparently doubled as governor and district attorney. So they brought him before the governor for judgment. That's quite a statement that Luke has given us here. What's it mean? They brought him before the governor for judgment. My mental picture is Paul's already tied up. Paul might already be in chains. And he is being forcibly presented to the courtroom of Galio. And if they get the verdict they want, they're going to kill him on the spot. So, what's with the Jews' action at this point? Who is Galio? Well, I've got another little historical snippet on Galio. We see his bust, some artist's rendition of him. And his name, he had a new one too, Lucius Junius Galio Ananus. I guess that's why he went by Galio. He was a Roman senator, and he was the brother of the famous Roman writer Seneca. Seneca became the tutor of young Nero. And Galio had a role in that as well. So Galio was one of the teachers for Nero. What does that tell you about this guy? He is best known, though, for dismissing an accusation brought against Paul the Apostle in Corinth. He held that post of proconsul in Corinth for just 1 year, 51 to 52. So we have outside biblical evidence of just when Paul was in Corinth. It was in 51 to 52. But he returned after 1 year to Rome for the lifestyle of the privileged. But the Jews quickly arranged to accuse Paul before this new guy, before he could maybe find out who's who and what's what, and just take advantage of his desire to get off to a great start in his new role. They said, this is our chance. Let's bring Paul before him and see if Galio will just, convict him. Okay, I find him guilty of some charge that is worthy of capital punishment. That's what the Jews were hoping for. However, it all unfolds a little differently than they were expecting. Apparently, Galio lines up with his boss, Claudius, Caesar, in his rejection of Jews and Jewish things. Verse 13. They accused Paul of, here's the great accusation, persuading people to worship God in ways that are contrary to our law. But just as Paul started to make his defense, Galio turned to Paul's accusers and he said, listen, you Jews, If this were a case involving some wrongdoing or a serious crime, I would have reason to accept your case. But since it is merely a question of words and names and your Jewish law, take care of it yourselves. I refuse to judge such matters." And he threw them out of the courtroom. The crowd then, now this verse 17 is proof that the Bible has some weird stuff. The crowd then grabbed Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and beat him right there in the courtroom. But Galio paid no attention. What? Why is this verse in there? What are we learning here? What's the purpose? Luke, what are you doing? So we're left to speculate because Luke doesn't tell us necessarily. But Galio wanted nothing to do with this case, so he tossed it. I actually wish he had waited just a little bit, because I think we got robbed of an incredible speech that Paul was about to give, declaring who Jesus Christ was and refuting the claims of the Jews. But we didn't get to hear it, because Galio said, "No, I'm not going to listen. All you get out of here." Oh, darn. I would have liked to have heard that. So why did they grab Sosthenes and beat him up? We don't know, but we do know, remember, Crispus was the previous leader of the synagogue in Corinth, and he came to faith in Jesus Christ and his family. So he was no longer in the synagogue, and Sosthenes was apparently the new leader replacing Crispus. Maybe it was his idea to take advantage of Galio coming into his new position, and he said, "This is our chance. Let's trump up the charges against Paul. Let's bring him before the brand new guy and see if we can get a conviction." And when it didn't work at all, it backfired. The angry mob, "This was your idea, Sosthenes," and they beat him up right in the courtroom. We don't know, but it's a weird passage. Okay. But again, we see the fulfillment of God's promise. What did God tell Paul in the vision in the night? No one is going to harm you. Here you go. They didn't even get to lay a finger on it. God fulfills his promises to you, to me, to everyone. So, in conclusion, I just want to say that Corinth is an important city. The city and the church played a prominent role in the life and the ministry of the Apostle Paul. Along with the writing of New Testament scriptures, there are 160 chapters outside of the Gospels. 160. 45 of them were either written to Corinth or from Corinth. Because remember, this was Paul's home for a year and a half. So Corinth played a major role, and it still does in any kind of theological understanding of our faith today. What are the takeaways? Well, your takeaway is just as valid as mine. But I thought, what do I want to focus on? What do I want to share with you? That at least two timeless takeaways from this passage. This passage, which is mostly narrative, mostly historical literature, bringing us up to speed on the events of Paul's life. So the first one that I came up with was, your efforts at sharing your faith and belief in Jesus are guaranteed to succeed. Guaranteed to succeed. And you think, Doug, no, they're not. Well, yeah. We have to change the definition of succeed. Because as Paul said to them, your guilt remains with you. I have told you the truth. I am innocent of any task of sharing with you the truth. When you and I share our faith in Jesus Christ with anybody, and they don't want to listen. They change the subject. They think you're an idiot. They just don't. No, they're just not interested. We see that as a failure. We think we have failed. No, we haven't. Because their hearing and their rejecting is part of a sovereign God plan too. But He needs us to share. He needs us to preach. He needs us to talk. The response is not our responsibility. So your sharing of your faith is guaranteed to succeed if you just do it. If you do it, you're a success. Now, you do want to learn how to do it graciously. You want to be a student of the person you're talking to. You want to know what they're all about so that you can apply the truth very personally and very effectively. Secondly, ministry is best done in a team rather than solo. Well, I think we see Paul getting sometimes himself out of line, himself in trouble, himself, at the end of his rope, because it appears in Corinth that he was doing all the public ministry, and Priscilla, Aquila, Silas, and Timothy, when they arrived, they were doing all the practical labor to pay for the support of the ministry team. Now, that's important. But not to the extent of leaving one person out there as doing all the public teaching and preaching. The spiritual opposition to such activity is so extreme that God intended for it to be done in small groups. Ecclesiastes is rich with passages that talk about one person working alone, they're in trouble. They're at high risk. Two people bring a greater reward, and they have more fun doing it. Three people are a bond that cannot be broken. There are tons of research out there today that demonstrate that ministry teams outperform disconnected individuals every time. It's true that working as a team of equals can be cumbersome, it can be slower, it can be frustrating, but the long-term results are clearly superior to that of any lone ranger. There's an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think we see that Paul learns this lesson. And later on in his letters to the churches and to Timothy and to Titus, he talks about find elders, find the core people that you can minister with. And at the end of some of his letters, he lists dozens of names of people who were teammates and useful in ministry, and he praises them and he thanks God for them. Ministry is meant to be done together. One of the keys that we need to remember as we you continue to work your way through the book of Acts is it is an incredible record of how the Church of God expanded from Jerusalem, to the whole world. And thank you, International, for the role you have had in that expansion. Through your history, you have faithfully supported missionaries and workers. You have faithfully discipled military people who have been here for a brief time and have moved on. And you have had a tremendous impact, far beyond what we'll ever know until we get to glory. So keep it up. Keep it up. So sharing the gospel will always bring a God-given result. And let's leave the results to Him. But as you do ministry, as you think about ministry, as you think about how to move forward, do it as a team rather than as a bunch of lone rangers. I saw that on the mission field for years. The Lone Rangers are irritating, and they rarely succeed in the long run. The teams have a lot more fun, and they're more effective. Father in heaven, we just thank you so much for your word being so clear, so encouraging to us. We ask that we would be those people who listen, who hear what you have to say, and we obey it. What a privilege to know Jesus and to be able to tell others about him, whether they get angry or whether they believe. We want to be obedient in sharing who he was, the Messiah, the true Son of God, the true high priest. And it is in his name that we thank you. Amen.